Hey everybody, welcome back to another Simulacra Developer Diary. My name is CJ. So this is kind of an art-heavy update video, kind of going over some of the workflow improvements that I've been exploring as part of improving my hard surface work and building some of the models for the base area of the game, and then showing off the models that I actually produced this week as a result of those techniques. So one of the things that I found from a lot of very cool other tutorial videos and work by really talented artists like Torfrick and a myriad of other people are that you can actually use some of these kind of more hidden features to speed up your workflow in a really significant way. Um, so one of the things that you tend to have to do a lot with hard surface modeling is, build up your low poly version of the model or start with a high poly version, then completely reproduce that. And a lot of times, your base shape is kind of what you're after, and you're just trying to get those kind of nice, kind of smoothed edges. And as it turns out, and this isn't just particular to Modo, there are materials that you can use that will actually, oops, I'm on the wrong version of the material. There we go. They're essentially specialized materials that you can actually round out those edges just in the shader itself. So it will calculate the sharp angle, and then it will smooth those out, and you can actually bake those down to normal maps. And that image that I accidentally popped up earlier is the baked normal map of this model. So this is a section of a kind of a drafting table that I've been working on. And so in the shader itself, I'll pump this up by a bit. You can see that it actually is taking those really crisp, sharp edges, and it's smoothing those down by whatever factor that I put in here. So right now it's 30 millimeters. So it's actually smoothing out those convex edges, and it's actually also welding together those edges as well, of any kind of floating details that aren't actually part of the same geometry. So that's super duper helpful because it means you can work with your base version of the model and still get this really nice edge detail, which is really helpful for my game in particular because a lot of times the model is going to be seen from quite a distance from the game camera. So being able to kind of control and tweak that edge detail without having to remodel or rework anything in the geometry is really helpful. So if we switch over to Substance Designer, and I'm going to close down Modo just to keep things moving quickly, you can see the generated version of the model. The black areas, by the way, are just some of the ambient occlusion from the actual complete setup. But so you see these really nice kind of highlighted areas where the kind of generator node that I'm using will actually highlight those, and then some of the the creases are where the dirt and excess paint and so on accumulate. But so being able to generate those edge details really quickly is really helpful. But then so the next stage in the process, just to kind of keep the pipeline as smooth as possible, is adding padding in between these islands. So if you're not familiar, when your texture is actually being used in the game, depending on the memory of the scene, its scale on the actual in screen space, a whole bunch of variety of factors, it will use either the full textures resolution, or it will drop down what are called bitmaps into kind of the smaller versions of the same texture. So if it's a 2048, it'll drop down to 1024, 512, 256, so on. Moving by powers of 2. And that can be problematic if you've got sections that are actually quite close together. You can, because it's dropping down in level fidelity, those areas will kind of start to bleed together, which In the case of the normal map, it can be an issue. You're mainly going to get some shading differences. In the case of your ambient occlusion, it can be a lot worse because you'll actually get these black areas that are potentially creeping into pure white surfaces, and you'll get these really ugly artifacts showing up where you've got seams. So using a kind of a utility node that I downloaded from Polycount, and I can also track that down and make it available. But it's very easily found in the I think it's the master substance designer thread. Um, I bet this multi-padding node that I can just pipe my textures into, and it will use the alpha map. It will then kind of draw the alpha map back a little bit into the padded area. So based on whatever settings I choose, it will kind of shrink it back into this kind of in-between space. You may not be able to see it, but Modo, depending on your settings, will bake out with a kind of a variable area of padding. It will then clip that out and then stack progressively larger blurred areas on top of it. And the result is that you get these really nice blended spaces in between that kind of serve to protect all of your details. So even if it drops down and it starts to bleed into the surrounding areas, you're not really going to notice because it's such a similar tone. And the really cool thing about that is by having that all packed together into a node, it means that I can freely update anything in Modo, rebake it out. It will automatically pipe through, update those. Because the padding is done early, any other filters that I do based on those will automatically carry over and have that padding in them as well. And if I was, if I was running into any further issues, I could then just, add on another layer of padding if I wanted to. But it means that you get these really nice end result textures, even if they're kind of a rough kind of what I'm going for with a lot of these models is kind of trying to get them to their quote unquote unpainted state as if they were minifigurines that had either like a primer coat or whatever on them. But they've got this really, really nice subtle detail into their base state, and it's all built in and it all happens pretty much automatically without me having to do anything. So then the end result in Unreal, and sorry again, just closing for memory's sake, is you get these really, really nice edges that are holding up, even from a distance. So even if my game camera is up here, I'm still getting this sense of this kind of smooth edge, and it's not just totally disappearing. And the model itself feels really kind of naturalistic and not, it doesn't have that really kind of synthetic sharpness to it. So this is kind of a couple of the models that I was working on, as I mentioned. This is kind of the complete drafting table set up in a blueprint. So I've got a kind of a temporary screen shader going on, a light that's actually associated with it. You can rotate this panel so the light will travel through with it, so on and so forth. I also built this bookcase. I apologize for the shifting around. I also built the bookcase earlier this week, kind of based on the idea that a lot of the base components I want to feel like they can travel really quickly. So this is kind of a built-up ladder that would collapse down into the kind of a trunk form factor with these kind of chunky handles on the sides. So I built the bookcase itself and then also the models that are kind of scattered on its surface. And kind of jumping back to about what the game view would be like, you can see how it feels kind of like I described it. It's got that nice kind of smooth surface to it and feels a bit like an unpainted figurine model. And by getting more and more of the models to this state, I'm getting kind of a sense of the details that I want from them without needing to kind of fully commit to whatever materials, or being, I should I should restate that, kind of, I don't want to be distracted by, oh, is that the right kind of metal, or that, that paint job just really doesn't work for me. I want to get as many of the kind of shape details in as possible, and then probably do like a paint over in Photoshop, or maybe just kind of some low level experiments with the texture. But by getting things to this stage, it's really kind of just playing with the aesthetics from there. All of the edge detail and the really kind of difficult stuff is kind of squared away, and I can, kind of just freely swap out any section of it to be a particular metal, or anything that I like. So I'm really happy with the way that this kind of process and kind of learning experiment has turned out. Um, and getting more and more of the models in there is really, really satisfying and fun. So probably what I'm going to be focusing on this month, partly due to limitation of, I just don't have a huge amount of time. Um, but I'm really, really excited to get more of the base models into the game and kind of up to this level of detail. It's really kind of fun and exciting. So, as per usual, if you have any thoughts or comments, questions, anything of like, definitely leave them down in the questions. Sorry, in the comments below. Um, and yeah, thanks as always for stopping by. I really appreciate taking the time. And I will hopefully have another update video coming in next week. Probably more of this stuff and maybe a little bit more of the actual work in engine. So thanks again. Have a fantastic rest of your week.